Okay. Everybody, welcome, welcome. I'm going to take a minute here and let you all the enter the space. Okay, there we go. Our first people are coming in. So as you enter, we're going to have a very, very short little poll. It'll take you all of a few seconds to answer your status as a parent, a student, educator, or also in terms of your grade level. Students in 12th grade or 11th, 10th, 9th, 8th, getting a sense of who our audience is today. So go ahead and fill that out. It'll be really quick. And I see we're still entering some people into the room. That'll probably continue for a few more minutes. Tonight, just to note that we're going to be recording this, and we are going to send a copy of the recording, which you'll be able to watch later, a couple days. And we're gonna have time tonight for question and answer. So we're gonna have some Q&A after I deliver my slides. And I think without further ado, why don't we go ahead and jump in? So tonight's topic is a topic I like. I think it's one of my preferred things, talking about self-regulation, emotional regulation. I think there's tremendous value in this, and I see this with my students for test preparation, my academic students, my students for executive functioning. There's kids who get anxious, get nervous, and how do you manage that, and how do you optimize even when you have some stress, some anxiety? All right, so let's jump in and look at some of those. I'll do some definition on the front end. I'll define it, and then we'll talk about things to help, because there are many, many things to help. One of the things that's meaningful and important is looking at our terms. And anxiety is a clinical term. I have anxiety, anxiety disorder, and those things are clinical versus I have some stress, I'm a little bit worried. And there are times we start to pathologize something which is very natural. And a student having some, a little bit of stress, a little bit of worry about how I might do on this test makes sense, especially when it's a high stakes test, and it counts, thoughtful, giving it some energy versus I have real anxiety, which can be really debilitating, and being mindful of that difference. So anxiety, it's fear, nervous apprehension about bad things which might happen. And so that's something that's a key difference. Um, so again, stress, normal reaction, things, possible perceived threat, anxiety. I had this fear in the future of bad things which might happen. So I'm a little bit stressed about this upcoming test versus I have anxiety about this going wrong and this thing happens and then this whole chain of events. That really is more anxiety based. And when you have real anxiety, that can impact and that can really impair performance in many, many ways. So we want to minimize that and try to address that, which is why you're here tonight. When it comes to stress, when it comes to arousal, there is a Yerkes-Dodson curve. It's 100 years old plus, and there's a certain level of arousal and stress that enhances performance. That without that level of stress, I'm not going to practice as much. I'm not going to focus the same way. I'm not going to recruit resources. But the right level of stress leads to the right level of performance. So getting rid of all stress, that's suboptimal. You're not going to perform your best. But then too much stress, it goes from eustress into distress, and then things start to diminish. And that's where we might start going towards some stress into this anxiety condition, where now I'm performing at a suboptimal level and it's starting to affect me in other ways. And when you perceive something not as a challenge, but as a threat, this could really hurt me. That's when we start moving towards anxiety. When this test might actually hurt me, keep me out of the school, keep me off the scholarship, might make college hard to pay for, then suddenly it's not, I'm a little bit, my performance matters. Now it's, oh gosh, what happens if? And that starts having a cascading effect on performance. So again, some stress, perfect. When tests matter, I always have some stress, and I was a good student. Many of you out there are too. And having a little bit of cortisol, perfect. You want some. A little stress hormone in the mix, it's totally healthy. With problem solving, you can do self-care and calming and relaxation, but some is okay, but then there's levels, there's excess. When you don't trust yourself, you don't trust you're gonna have the ability to succeed, that starts impairing your problem solving centers. You start imagining, oh God, this is all going downhill, it's over. I've had kids run out of tests crying. I had one girl, it happened 3 times in a row. She kept leaving these tests. She was so overworked because, she needed the scholarship money, she needed a certain score, and that was not helping her do her best on the test. So that's where, anxiety becomes really crippling in many ways. There are other things to be mindful of when someone has anxiety about a test. They're really fearful. Sometimes there are things behind that. They could be worried because they aren't fast enough. There's something, they have some learning differences. It could be that they're concerned, they're really worried because you know what? They don't actually know the material. And then that creates a higher level of anxiety. We do know that students with disabilities do have higher levels of test anxiety. In some ways, if they have processing speed challenges or dyscalculia, they have working memory issues, they often fear more concern, more anxiety because there are things underlying. That so in some cases they're channeling anxiety from somebody else. I had a student who was very, very, very scared and nervous, and there was a lot of pressure coming from actually a parent, a mother, who was putting too much pressure. And so the kids' pressure and anxiety was actually being supported by someone in the family. So be mindful of that. And I like talking about what's going on with the brain and what's happening with anxiety with some kids. And I actually go through some of the physiology and some of the morphology when you have anxiety and what's happening. And for some kids, yeah, testing does trigger feelings of anxiety. And the amygdala, it's Greek for almond. It's a tiny little shape in the back in the limbic brain, and it's always scanning for threats. And if it spots a threat, it starts to release a series of hormones, catecholamines, the stress, the whole fight or flight response, which is very real and very physical. The frontal cortex, that's executive functioning, that's problem solving, that slows things down. When you activate this part of the brain, you send GABA, which is a receptor to calm down the amygdala. And then, so it's like the frontal cortex slows down anxiety, the amygdala can turn things up. And so you always want to get back to the problem solving, the center in the front. What can we do? What can you do? Not the sense of helplessness and I can't do anything. That's when it starts, I'm threatened by this. All right. And what we know that working memory, when a student is experiencing real, like an abundance of stress, we've done stress tests with cortisol levels and, spit tests. When someone's really high on cortisol, it affects their working memory. So when they're really juiced and they're really, really scared and nervous, they can read a paragraph and then like, what did I just read? Like they're not thinking as clearly. I studied this material for 6 months and now what did I study? I have no idea. I'm blanking. That's from excess cortisol. So a little cortisol, amazing. You need some. A little epinephrine helps you focus. A little more, these are good things, but excessive and you can't, cognitive tasks get overwhelmed. So that is the balance of a little bit of stress, but not too much stress is a sweet spot. And again, stress hormones, working memory, performance goes down. That's pretty clear. If you want to learn more about this and about how the mind works, now it's not new anymore. Dan Siegel is an MD, psychiatrist, writes about this and talks about how our brains work, how stress affects our brains. I think he's fabulous. And I've used some of his discourses with my own students, trying to explain again how to calm themselves down. Pretty helpful. So on the webinar, your parents, and you're going to talk to your kids. And part of it is helping them normalize anxiety, normalizing stress, some worry that, you know what, it happens. There are some areas where we do experience some anxiety. There's some, and it's actually quite common. Test anxiety is extremely common. About a quarter of kids experience test anxiety all the time. And over half of kids experience it some of the time. I used to have a slide on that, which is okay. But in the grand scheme, it's part of the human experience, having some stress, some worry, some fear. They're not broken, they're not flawed. It's normal. So helping normalize that can help take down some of the edge of, I'm afraid of my anxiety, or I'm worried about that I'm anxious. It's like, it's okay, it's normal. And also learning how to model for your kids coping skills. When you have anxiety, when you have stress, how do you manage this? And even talking to them, like, I was worked up about things when I was in college or when I was in graduate school or applying for an interview for a big job. Here's how I calm myself down. And you can, teach kids what they can do and things that you've done, things that they might try themselves. Self-talk is a big part of anxiety. And honestly, anxiety, it's mediated by self-talk. Self-talk, negative talk, critical talk is what keeps it going. It fuels it. Inner dialogue. So whatever we tell ourselves, we're listening, and that can actually release those chemicals we talked about before. And so when you have fearful thoughts, you imagine, oh God, what if I screw up on this test, whatever it is, you should, don't worry about that. Like that's, you can kind of look at that as this inner critical part and not have that be the gospel. Like, I have to listen to everything that my brain tells me. When a student says, I'm bad at testing, to me, it's very, very important that you immediately challenge that. And, that thought in and of itself becomes a thing with energy, and that can actually affect performance. Because I'm bad at test taking. Like if I have low self-efficacy, then I'm not going to try as hard. Then I might give up more quickly. I might not be as resourceful or as cognitively, creative. And when I come to a hard question, it's like versus what? Even if historically they haven't been the world's best at testing, it's like up to this point, up to now, I haven't been, but I'm putting in time, energy, and effort, and I intend to do better on this test versus this global thing. I'm bad at X. I'm bad at math. I'm bad at science. If you hear a kid say that, help correct that. And I like to use the language of possibility. Are you open to the possibility of doing better on these tests, on science, on math, whatever it is, whatever self-limiting belief they have? Are you open to the possibility of making a change here? And if that's really important. You want to, correct those really overarching, I'm bad at blank, black and white thinking. And even if, I didn't do as well on this test, like really, are you bad at every test always? Is there never an exception to that? Because sometimes they ignore information which is disconfirmatory and they only glob on to things which reinforce, this thought. There was this confirmatory bias. So make sure you question and poke at if someone says I'm bad at blank. Like really, in every context, always, forever? Is that pervasive, or are you forgetting certain things? I want kids to focus less on comparing themselves to other people. I'm, compared to my brother or my sibling or compared to you. It's ultimately all comparisons are about self. You know what? Here's where I started off on this practice test. I'm going to do better. I'm competing with myself, not anyone else out there. That's not helpful if I start doing massive external comparisons, and that can generate anxiety. Looking around and oh gosh, Jennifer's here and Susie's there and Tom is there. Oh man, I'm not gonna, versus, what, you're competing with yourself. That really helps lower anxiety levels. One thing I really like, very simple, there's a researcher, Ethan Cross, out of Michigan, in the Michigan Studies Department. He was looking at psychology, and he has a book I love called Chatter, which is all about self-talk. And one of the things I read one of his papers like 10 years ago now, he had 2014, where he talks about the value of you statements. And students who are struggling, trying to overcome a task or a challenge, if they can shift their language to, I've got this, I can do this, to a you statement, like Jed, you can do this, you've got this. It creates a level of separation of cognitive distance, and that helps you calm yourself more than I've got this. And so having kids even do a tiny little shift, you've got this, you prepared for this thing, you're ready for this test. That the you statements help you ground yourself and lower anxiety. They're effective. I also like students focusing. Whenever we're looking at a goal orientation, I have a student, let's say they're failing a class, which I have a student right now, I'm working with her. And when she states what she's trying to accomplish, like, what's your goal here? She's like, I want to shift her from I don't want to fail this class to a success orientation. I want to get a 61 or greater on this class. My goal is to pass the class, not I don't want to fail. And so if a student ever says something to the effect of I really don't want to, screw up my ACT, like, you know what, let's shift that language, because that orientation, the approach versus the avoidant, actually impacts behaviors, impacts cognitions and affect. So shift always toward the approach orientation. I want to accomplish and get a 26 or better on this test. Keep it always in the positive. That helps for motivation. And again, dichotomous thinking. There is a right score. There is a right or wrong. It's like that's too simplistic. And I'm shooting for the score, but it's not. If I don't hit this, I've failed. Help someone avoid that kind of black and white thinking, which is anxiety enhancing dichotomous thinking. And that's the Albert Ellis rational emotive behavioral therapy talks about awfulizing, catastrophizing. It's going to be a failure. It's going to be a disaster if I don't achieve the outcome. And even in terms of a test, let's say your kid has, I really have some big ambitions or goals, and I need a big score to be eligible to get in some of these top schools. But it's good to have goals. But even in the world where that doesn't happen, it's like the world is not over. And there are 1,900 test optional schools in the country. And so that's a lot. And there are many where testing is not as prominent. So the idea that, because again, that pressure, I have to achieve the score or else, that creates stress and that can impair performance. Versus I'd like to do well, I'm gonna do as well as I can, but there's always a plan B. And life isn't over if I don't accomplish X or Y, if I don't get a certain GPA, a certain test score, because that's the pressure that impairs performance. When you put that massive weight on yourself of this or else, then that can really make you perform worse. All right, inner coaching. Big fan of inner coaching. It's tied to self-talk. What are you telling yourself? Because those messages can extinguish anxiety or ramp them up, your messaging. And when you activate your inner coach, your problem-solving centers, again, you get to the frontal cortex, the amygdala tends to calm down. So we want to get to problem solving. What's our next move? What's the right next step? And that's where you want to be. I also like practice tests because Albert Bandura, a genius researcher, thinker out of Stanford, talked about self-efficacy, and that students, when they believe their abilities are at a certain level, that lowers anxiety. And one of the primary ways to increase self-efficacy statements and beliefs about certain tasks is through mastery experiences. I believe I'm gonna do better because I did better on these 3 practice tests. And that starts to shift my level of self-efficacy, my belief in my ability to accomplish a certain task. So if I have some success behind me, I begin to feel more confident and my anxiety decreases. So one of the main things you can do if a kid has anxiety is give them some success. Give them some mastery experiences, and lo and behold, anxiety begins to diminish and wane when they realize, oh man, and also I have my students attend to those very closely. Oh, wow, you went from a 24 on your first baseline to a 26, then 27, amazing. So what are you doing to accomplish those gains, those goals? Well, I'm taking my time more, I'm writing my problems down more, I'm being more attentive. Okay, so your behaviors are tied to the outcomes. And then like, oh yeah, I see that. And then anxiety starts to decrease. So when you see I have a strategy, I'm working it, and I'm seeing outcomes, less anxious. One thing I've done before with students, just recently actually, is when the students have a lot of anxiety, I have them do a little cognitive behavioral thing where they draw or give a name to the anxiety voice. So it's not, man, I am so anxious. Like, oh, that's just Murray the worry. He's always, or Myrtle, whatever name you give this thing. There you go again. That's your job, to send the self-doubt, anxiety, worry statements. And then it helps, again, create some of that cognitive distance, some separation. That's not me, but oh, that's my click word, automatic worry response. And it's not, I'm worried. Look, that's Murray's job. All right, good to see you, Murray. And that separation, again, helps give you some agency, some control. And so you feel you're less at the mercy of these thoughts. Because some people are afraid of their thoughts. There's, oh, that's a different part of me that's talking. That's not me. That's not all of me. And there's different parts of me. And so that can be a helpful little thing to kind of externalize and separate out those the negative self-talk. Another area that's helpful is a student has some worry, some anxiety around testing, and I say, well, are there any other areas of your life, where you've experienced some stress, some arousal, some worry, some anxiety? And they may say, yeah, I get worked up before I go out for lacrosse matches. Like, well, what have you tried? What have you done that's helped you manage that anxiety, that stress, that arousal? And they may say, well, what I do there, I play a certain song on repeat, or I calm myself down, or there's a certain scent that I use to help me relax. There's a certain, I take a hot bath, or I go for a run. I'm like, well, great. So if you go for a run before games, why don't we take that and apply that here? Anything, so again, it's the strengths-based focus. If you have anything you've tried before, bring it over to testing, and let's try that. Another area, which I think is fun. This is from a book, Sean Baylock, who is currently the president of Dartmouth, but she's a researcher out of Chicago for over a decade. She's amazing. And she wrote about the reappraisal of arousal. And there were plenty of other studies and research about this, that students who understand that some arousal is actually okay. There are kids who like their body, oh, my heart's beating a little faster. I feel, a little bit sweaty, or something's happening, and oh gosh, that means I'm not ready. That means I'm not going to do well. Versus you reappraise, you reframe that arousal as, you know what? That little bit of heartbeat, it's actually okay. That means I have a little bit of cortisol, epinephrine, and that means I'm actually getting ready for my best performance. And that's really helpful. And she mentions, the boss, Bruce Springsteen, used to always have massive like butterflies in his stomach, and pulse was racing before shows. He's like, man, I'm so nervous. I'm so scared before shows. But after a certain period of time, he was able to reappraise that arousal and say, wait a minute, it's not that I'm afraid, it's that I'm actually excited. And he's like, oh, there's my heartbeat again. There's my stomach. Like that means I'm getting ready for a great show. And that reappraisal is very powerful. And there's some research when you tell kids this, that a little bit of elevated pulse rate, a little bit of, some physical changes are actually signs that you're ready and signs that you're focused, not signs that you're not ready. And that helps students do better on the GRE and other exams. So that's also a cool thing too, that a little bit of arousal is great. Um, and that was the whole thing, shifting that I'm anxious to I'm excited. And there's a Harvard researcher, Alison Brooks, found that people who reframed that arousal did better on like the hardest mathematics tasks and so forth. So yeah, my heart's beating fast. That doesn't mean I'm not ready. That means I'm actually in the right mindset. So the body and the mind are connected intimately. I mentioned before, some people feel arousal in their body, their stomach, their pulse, all these things, because the body and the mind are very deeply integrated. There are several techniques, I promise techniques, for helping it with arousal. There's something I have done myself, and I believe in it. It's called tapping. It's called the emotional freedom technique. You can Google it right now, tapping EFT. And all it is you tap a certain number of points that are on this, Chinese meridian system. And after tapping those points, you experience a greater sense of relaxation. And you can try it if yourself right now. And there are these 8 points. You watch a little kind of video. It's the simplest thing. It's free. It costs nothing at all. Where you tap like 7 times, my stress, and you tap the inside of your eyebrows. You tap the outside of your eyebrows. And honestly, I'm calming down as I do this. I don't understand this. Under my nose, tap 7 times, under my chin, collarbone. I'm about to fall asleep under my armpits. And then there's something here. And I have students who do this. You might see occasionally even like professional athletes at the Olympics. I've seen this at the Olympics, people doing some quick tapping before their events. And somehow or other, this is simplest things. It's very, very, very basic, totally free. Breathing. We also know that the breath and levels of arousal are connected. And it's mediated through the vagus nerve. We know that deep diaphragmatic breathing back and forth in a slow pulse stimulates the vagus nerve, which actually tamps down cortisol levels, which actually lowers the heart rate, lowers blood pressure. It activates the parasympathetic nervous system and it calms down the sympathetic system. So it's deep breathing. It's really, really tough to do deep diaphragm breathing and be all worked up. These things, when you get worked up, you start breathing more shallow, breathing in your chest, not your deep the diaphragm breathing. So doing some practicing of breathing is very helpful. Doing 4 counts where you breathe and you hold and you exhale and you hold. And it starts to, calm everything down. So teaching kids this, showing kids this, that's a way to help with anxiety. Taking a minute for mindfulness, any kind of mindfulness where you're watching your thoughts, watching things, closing your eyes, calming yourself down. Very, very helpful. I have an app I use called the Waking Up app where I do some meditation. I've been doing that for several years. I do some Qigong and some Tai Chi. There are things I do, and again, kids can all do this stuff. So meditation, learning to calm yourself, listening, doing any meditation is a good thing. Any kind of contemplative experience that kids can do. There's my daughter's in a school where they do like yoga for 5-year-olds. And some schools have this, and then after school, I've done yoga on and off for years. I've done Qigong since I was like 18 on and off. Very basic, but learning how to calm yourself and can help you with calming yourself with test anxiety. It's all the same thing. And if there's any interest at all in yoga, Qigong, Tai Chi, anything contemplative and slow, putting your phone away, it can be helpful and beneficial for managing anxiety on tests. So if you can get your arousal down in other areas, it'll help you in all domains. And the body is, again, very much tied to anxiety. And there's a lot of research about how exercise, cardiovascular fitness, especially getting your heart rate really up, releases endorphins, endogenous morphine, which calms things down, and it releases other neurotransmitters, dopamine and serotonin, which can elevate mood, and also suppresses cortisol production. So that's one of the reasons why kids who go for a run in the morning often are much calmer on test day, which is very, very handy. So going for a run, that's very, very helpful. Sleep. Kids who get a bad night's sleep, that can increase that trigger startle response. You're a little bit jumpier. We all know this when we're not sleeping well. So sleeping is super helpful. And it's the sleep, not the night before, 2 nights before. That is really essential for how you feel on Saturday morning. So getting good night's sleep on Thursday and Friday before a test, very important, very helpful. Other things that can be helpful, taking a walk outside can help calm you down. We know nature sounds, a waterfall, negative ions. They're very, very calming and very, very healing. Human touch is very powerful. That releases oxytocin and that has suppresses cortisol and lowers activation of the amygdala. So human connection is how I have small children when they're scared. I hold them or I pet their backs. It's like any kind of human touch is good. Even petting your dog in a slow, repetitive, way is very beneficial. It lowers stress levels, lowers cortisol levels. Other things, hot baths, tea, quiet spaces, learning how to nurture ourselves is very powerful. Your food matters. If I eat a bunch of garbage and I'm going to be on this sugar explosion and then crash, that can affect my feelings of anxiety and calm. So make sure there's hydration, make sure, there's some protein, blueberry things, it's not just super high glycemic foods before a test. This is something also I like a lot with just the human touch. You may not have heard of this, but there's something to this. And you might try this right now. You're at home in front of your cameras, but it's called havening. And I have a buddy of mine, therapist for decades, who's all into this. And I say, let me try this. And havening, again, we know that this repetitive touch it sends signals to the brain. The afferent nerves go up, and then that releases calming, hormones. So if one of them is like doing kind of slow, repetitive your face, the other is your hands. We do this. And the other one is just, back and forth on your arms a few times. And it is relaxing. You feel it, like calm, slow touch. One thing I do sometimes also, I put my hand on my chest and I imagine like I'm breathing in, like calming energy and breathing out. And so again, these are simple things we can do. Um, Heart math is, they talk about thinking of something that's calming, thinking about someone you love when you have anxious feelings, thinking about a person you really care about, and that you put your hand on your heart, and that can actually calm and get you into a more healthy sinus rhythm and lower stress, biofeedback stuff. Some people like having a stone, a worry thing that they can hold in their hand, a tangible thing. Before I would go and give big lectures, I used to have a little rock I would hold in my hand to kind of hold it, and it would help calm me down. I still like crystals and things, which I occasionally, lapis or something I can hold in my hand, which can be centering and grounding. And some people have like an image, like an inner coach, someone who's an inner coach, they can, is very calm, very centered. They can try to evoke that into that inner construct. Journaling. We do know that journaling has been shown, writing about what you're worried about, writing about your stress can help us lower arousal levels. This was research out of Chicago, Sean Baylock and her colleague Ramirez. And so 10 minutes of writing. I'm nervous about tomorrow's test, and here's why. I'm nervous about, my performance. I'm not going to do as well. I'm nervous about this. I feel it in my chest. I feel it in my stomach. Writing about it helps reduce the rumination and actually pops performance. So again, it's expressive writing on the positive, and all these things. They free up working memory from that repetitive kind of thought. So writing down is helpful. And then other things in life that help lower anxiety, freeing up space. You may find that certain students tend to be overscheduled. They have a lot going on. They're not getting enough sleep. They're having other pressures and stress, and that can increase anxiety kind of globally. So looking at, is it just about this testing piece, or is it more of a broad, holistically, there's the student is a little bit wound tight, and that's showing up on testing as well. And I like, taking things off the plate. I like reducing activities. I like giving kids more space. And hopefully that does lower arousal, lowers anxiety. And then friends, talking to friends, connecting with others, humans, relationships. When you have those are strong, on average, anxiety at every level is decreased when you have really good networks of friendship and really honest. You can talk to your friends about what's going on with you. That's helpful. And then, we have these assessments and they give you a number, but I don't want students to evaluate themselves and their worth by a number. And taking some pressure off, I need to get this GPA or this test score. Again, it's one piece of information about you, like you'll be mailing off to colleges. There are many colleges, and it's good to have a goal without having it take up so much energy. I have to achieve this, or again, is that or else kind of thinking. So that's something also to be mindful of. I mentioned the friendships. That's important, and I think that's meaningful. So at Applerouth, we look about the science of learning, education, as well as the art of human connection. And that's kind of where we fit. That's our sweet spot. And so those are the main things I wanted to cover today. It's only 8:30, so we have a lot of time left over to talk about your questions and answers. So I want to open this thing up now. We're about to shift over to a poll. We do several things at Applerouth, test preparation, obviously a lot of that, academic tutoring, and coaching for executive functioning. So we do all these things. So take a second, just help us out. Let us know, are you looking at, which tests are your kids looking at? Any interest in any kind of follow-up? Um, and so we can make sure we get you that information that you need. Okay. So now let me shift over to your questions. I try to give a pretty broad overview and give you some specific tools for reducing anxiety on testing. And listen, there are many, many others. I've written some blogs on our website about that and different tools, techniques. But I feel like this is a grab bag. Maybe I touched on 15, 20 tools, and not everything works for everybody. Um, I didn't throw out some. There's also one called cognitive rehearsal. That's something that I used to like walk students through a test and have them close their eyes and imagine how they, you miss a question, but you feel okay. Like you're calming yourself and they actually see themselves in the test room and they do a little bit of visualization first. That can be helpful. I did that back when I was a cross country runner. My coach would walk us through you're rounding a turn, you're passing someone, here's how you feel. And just imagining it can help you learn how to ground yourself when you actually get there. Then just, having a mantra, students can repeat a certain mantra they want, I'm ready for this, I've got this, and have that be their go-to phrase if they start feeling some fear, some arousal. You've got this, you prep for this thing, you can do this thing. You are ready for this test. Jennifer, you've got this, and that kind of thing. So there's that. And there are many other ways. And I'll tell kids, here's some options. We can work on breathing, working on and then have them choose and pick. What do you think might be helpful? What sounds interesting to you? Because there are 20 things, you're not going to do all 20 things. Do you want to do some journaling? Is that your thing or not your thing? Do you want to do some stretching beforehand, some imaging and so forth? So what are your questions? I want to open this up that I've yet to address, or you want to go deeper into a certain thing, or do you want to clarify a question about tapping or about havening or about any of these modalities for lowering anxiety? And again, some of them are cognitive, some of them are cognitive behavioral, some of them are physical, some of them are, you can get towards anxiety through self-talk, you can get towards anxiety through breathing, you can get towards anxiety, by exercising. There are many pathways in. There's not just one way to manage emotions and self-regulation. There are lots and lots of ways in. And you want to find out what's going to work for your kid. And it's like a grab bag. Try this, try this, try this, see what sticks. Maybe 3 things work for you. Maybe these 17 aren't meaningful for you. Um, so what else? And there's a chat window there's a Q&A, and you can enter information and I'll be able to respond that way through the chat, the Q&A. And are there any questions? And if not, this may be one of my shorter webinars. Often there are questions. Um, wow. Okay. And I do want to throw something out there. I've had kids go on, this maybe sound crazy to you, but some parents are, they have their kids go on beta blockers, which, beta blockers, they block the beta receptors for adrenaline and other, and I'm not a big fan of using chemicals and using molecules to do the job because again, they're going to have stress in other areas of their life. And I want them to feel like they have the ability to manage stress and arousal and not that they need a pill. As a very, very, very last resort, kids who have extreme anxiety. But typically, I want to give them other tools and cognitive behavioral interventions before I go anywhere near any kind of medical intervention, in my perspective. It's something I remember that. One question, yes. So let me go to, oh, there we go, Q&A. Here we go. Oh, thank you. What about the student who needs processing time? So For the student who needs help with processing speed, in that regards, we have to practice getting faster, practicing being comfortable moving a little more quickly if they tend to be more contemplative and really go back and forth, ABC, that can become more efficient. Sometimes those students are eligible for extra time if they have an accommodation for disability. But otherwise, we can work with the clock. We do timing drills. And one thing often I can show them is very often if a student is really stuck on a problem, the more time they spend on that problem, the likelihood of getting the wrong answer tends to decline. That the items where they really are spinning their wheels, getting stuck, are ones where there's a lower chance of getting it right. And so at some point, you have to pull off the band-aid, just guess. Yeah, I'm going for C. It's either A or C. It's C. Moving on, versus really spinning your wheels. So there's that. Are you having a hard time engaging my kid to pay attention to these techniques? She has negative self-talk and she will not create an opening for the conversation. All right. So if a student, and part of it, kids sometimes don't listen to parents, which you experience, I experience. I have young kids, but man, my 4-year-old, there are times she's in a mood and nothing I say will get through at all. And sometimes the exact same thing from a different adult will get through. But for me, there is just a filter and it's deaf ears. And I totally get it. And one thing I try to lead with is lead with some vulnerability. Try to create a space where it's like, let me share something about a time I had crippling anxiety, about a time I had massive issues, and here's what I did. And they may say, oh, whatever, you don't know anything, you're an idiot. Or it may be they might listen because they're always trying to learn a little bit about life. And you sharing your experience, that may pique their interest a little bit. Versus, oh, dad's telling me what to do again, or mom is telling again, I don't want to hear it. Versus, what, let me share something. And it might be you ask them, like, are you willing to, I have a couple ideas, because you know what? In my life, I've experienced real stress and real worry and anxiety. And there's some things I've done and tried. Would that be interesting? Do you want to hear? And like give them some choice if they want to hear it or not. Because you can't force anyone towards self-regulation. If they're not interested in this, it's going to land on deaf ears. But there may be a way to pique their interest. You talking about how, man, I used to screw up totally with this, or this, I was a total train wreck. They're like, you were a train wreck? Really? That might get their attention. So there are different techniques. It could be it's better coming from somebody else. Sometimes from mom or dad, they can't hear it, but if it came from a different person, they could. If there is a trusted resource, elder, uncle, aunt, coach, friend, who might be able to offer something. But appropriate self-disclosure is a way I found that you can create connections with people if there seems to be a barrier. Okay. Next up, how can students build resilience against anxiety if they're getting inconsistent testing results? And that's interesting. So they're doing practice tests or testing, and it's really highly variable. What I'd want to understand is what is going on with that variability and what are the kids noticing? So I teach kids executive functioning skills. And when there is, varied outcomes, I really want to start getting curious, having to do you know what was different about this midterm compared to the last one? This exam, you got a 42 on, like, tell me about how you studied, what you studied, what was happening with you mentally, internally. Did you feel good during, after? I start doing a lot of questions. I want to get them thinking very critically about what's going on to see if there is a reason why it swings so much. Because that really is unusual. Why on one day I get this outcome, on the other day this outcome, and you're worried, man, like, wow, is it just like I'm rolling a dice? Or can they track back with their insights and their reflection? No, something really was different. And it could be my self-talk was different. It could be my sleep was different. I exercised here, I didn't hear. See if you can get them curious, and then the insights might follow if they're able to actually, track that. And so the more insights they can generate through discourse, the better. The more, because again, you're trying to teach them skills for self-regulation. You're not going to be there. Like if they're taking these tests now, in a few years they're on their own. They're going to be in college, and then they're going to have job interviews and high stress conditions, and they're going to have work things and assessments and so forth, and presentations, and they have to be able to deliver. And so they have to learn how to self-regulate and also how to know. So the more they can become reflective and thoughtful about how they perform in higher stress conditions, that's going to help them throughout their entire lives. So I look at this like, this is sure a little narrow test, but this is way bigger than that. Self-regulation goes on for years, so and decades. So I'd love them to start getting curious and interested in their own ability to regulate their own emotions and feelings. All right. Are there any other questions in the Q&A? And go ahead and please type them. You got me. I'm a trained educational psychologist I'm a certified counselor, so I know a couple things about this stuff. Yeah, how can students build resilience against anxiety? Oh, I'm sorry. We already answered that one. Any other questions, y'all? It's 8:41. If that's it, then we'll call it. Um, I think that's it. Well, thank you all for being here tonight. We'll send you a copy of the deck. And hope it was helpful. Please try this. And again, you'll have a copy of this. If you want to show someone this, share this, please feel free to. And there'll be other, things going on, webinars, articles. Oh, there is one final question before the training station. If student has lower PSAT, high academics, does that come across as anxiety? Not necessarily. And you might talk to the student about what's going on, timing issues, how do they feel about the test. Sometimes students have processing speed issues, which don't affect academics as much. It's more of a conversation in terms of, so when there's oftentimes a mismatch. Sometimes they have high test scores, lower grades. That's one thing. Sometimes there's higher grades, lower test scores, but it doesn't always mean anxiety. The only way you get towards that is through having a discourse and dialogue with your student about that. And what was their experience like? Were you all worked up? Were you nervous? Did you have distracting thoughts during the test, or were you pretty focused? Was that not an issue? So I think talk to your kid, and they'll talk to you, and it could be there's some certain skill deficits. They may have gotten their grades, but now they really don't fully understand Algebra 2, or they have some issues about their grammar that aren't as strong. And so it could be skill deficits, it could be other issues, timing issues, not always anxiety, but sometimes. That's one of the, so I would talk to them and find that out. All right, y'all. That is the time that we have. And everyone have a good night. And if you need any help at all with academic tutoring, with test preparation, with coaching for EF coaching, we're here and would love to help you. So, and everyone have a great night. Thank you.